Hey, can you hear us? Check up.
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
All right, it's good, and then it's good to go.
Awesome.
All right, guys, we are good to go now. All right, so hello, Polkadot community. Welcome back to our Ask the Team AMA series. And I'm Anna from Polkadot Insider, and today we are having a very special, a very fantastic project, which is t3rn, a project which is a smart contract hub being developed on the Polkadot network, which aims to provide a seamless interoperability between different blockchain networks. And with the t3rn platform, developers will be able to run smart contracts in any programming language and easily deploy them on the Polkadot network and other blockchains that are supported by the platform. Yeah, and in case you don't know, Polkadot Insider is a channel updating news, data analytics, real-time data, and research about projects to support retail investors' views when they invest in the Polkadot and kusama ecosystem. And going through the AMA with us today, we are so honored to have Mr. Jacob, the Chief Strategy Officer of t3rn, who's going to share with us what is unique about t3rn, what are we supposed to know about t3rn, and also what are some upcoming interesting things happening with t3rn in the upcoming time. Yeah, I'm so excited right now. Yeah, so no more waiting. So to kick off the atmosphere, sir, can you tell us something about t3rn in summary, and also what is your background, how you became involved in t3rn and also Polkadot network?
Sure. Yeah. So, first and foremost, thank you for having me. Love what you guys do for the Polkadot ecosystem. So, very, very grateful to be here. So, at t3rn, we essentially believe that the future of Web3 and blockchain is multi-chain. I think it's a narrative that has been widely discussed since 2017, 2018. And in all honesty, I think this was a problem that we thought would have been solved by now. But it is something that everyone's been well aware of. Is one of the key hurdles to mass adoption is the ability to seamlessly interact with different chains. There's always been that sort of narrative of you don't know what's happening when you're using your browser or when you're using your smartphone, but it works, right? And everyone's sort of been, open to the knowledge that the next step of blockchain actually being meaningfully adopted needs to reflect that more or less, right? You need to be able to jump across different ecosystems, different blockchains in a seamless and secure way. And so with that narrative in mind is why we founded t3rn. It essentially started from the thesis that everything works very well in terms of single ledger execution. So when you look at something like Ethereum and you're jumping across, carrying out different functionalities on the Ethereum network, you're safe in the knowledge that if anything happens at any point in a multi-step execution, if you run out of gas, whatever, everything's going to revert back to its original state, and your funds aren't going to end up stuck anywhere. And we started thinking about what it would look like to make that possible in the cross-chain realm, essentially. And sort of one thing led to another, and that's what led to the creation of t3rn, essentially. In terms of my background, so I started working at a project called Lisk back in 2017. Essentially, Lisk was a blockchain application platform developed in JavaScript. And that gave myself and t3rn founder Maciej, who also worked there as head of development, a really good sort of petri dish to experiment with different ideas about what we think a multi-chain world would look like. Essentially, Lisk worked with sidechains, so it was always an active and heated discussion about what it would look like for sidechains to interact with one another. And so when we left the project in 2020, we felt well equipped with the knowledge to essentially tackle this problem of seamless multi-chain execution, and that's what gave birth to the t3rn protocol.
Wow, it's just so interesting to get to know more about the story behind t3rn and also your journey with it. And yeah, as you say, we all agree that future of Web3 blockchain is multi-chain. Yeah, so we are down to hear more what is t3rn doing about it. Yeah, so well, talking about Polkadot, so we are curious about what are the core features that you guys inherit when integrating with Polkadot, and also what does it mean to t3rn's growth?
Sure. So, when you're developing a multi-chain protocol in any way, whether it's a bridge or a message passing protocol, anything, the biggest problem that you're faced with is security. In some way, in the last year, maybe 2 years, bridges especially have become a bit of a taboo word almost in this space because they're so associated, with exploits. I think in the last year they accounted for most of the exploits that have happened in the space. I think last time I checked, it was about $2.5 billion of funds taken from users. And so, we weren't naive to this when we began t3rn. We always knew that a bridge is only as useful as its security, basically. And that led us to really thinking about where we would deploy a multi-chain protocol like t3rn. There are obviously an array of different options. You can look at sort of spinning up your own blockchain, but having worked at Lisk, and that's essentially what we did there, it is a lot of work, and especially in terms of security, it becomes quite challenging. And when we looked at Polkadot, essentially, it seemed like a perfect fit for a protocol like ours, in that you can very much derive your security and stability from Polkadot's shared security model, based off their relation, basically. And so our protocol is inherently as secure as Polkadot itself, based on the Polkadot architecture, which Polkadot hasn't been exploited yet, and has so far so good, right? So it seemed like a perfect fit in that respect from a security model. Other than that, I think it's no secret that Polkadot as an ecosystem is incredibly supportive of builders. Ourselves have got 2 grants from the Web3 Foundation for what we've been developing. It made what we were building in the early stages possible, to be honest, and that's something that I can't understate the value of as well. And finally, it's sort of been quite well publicized, especially recently, how active the developer community is in Polkadot. And that's something we're also not naive to, in that the value of protocols developing is heavily sort of won and lost based on developer adoption. And what we see going on in Polkadot is really exciting in terms of GitHub commits, but also in terms of the sheer quality of projects that are deployed here and that continue to deploy. And so all of these things, the internal support from the Polkadot ecosystem, the stability and security of the Polkadot architecture itself, the quality of the projects within that ecosystem, and the developers themselves within the ecosystem too. I think all of those made Polkadot a very natural fit for us as a project. And as we start to deploy and roll out other aspects of our protocol, I think a lot of these things will kick into gear more, whether it's stability as we roll out our MVP, or when we get our smart contracts registry out there as well for developers to be remunerated and be able to leverage that as well. I think all of these things are going to come into play. So I think it's safe to say we're very happy with our decision to build within the Polkadot ecosystem, for sure.
Yeah, that is 100% right, that we know that security always supposed to stand first when it comes to building and developing. And we can see that, yes, you say Polkadot is a perfect fit for t3rn. Yeah, and we all see that Polkadot is so supportive and so active, and that's also why we love Polkadot a lot. Yeah. So next we're going to talk about competition. Yeah, we know that competition is always hard. So in comparison to other projects building the same thing in the ecosystem, so what really makes t3rn unique? And what are the core benefits for developers when they choose t3rn to deploy their dApps on?
So I would say, first and foremost, I don't think anyone is building the same thing that we're building within Polkadot, but also outside of it. I think the t3rn solution in itself is incredibly unique in what we're trying to propose in terms of multi-chain execution. I think, as you touched on, in need for security, I think one of the things that definitely sets us apart from most other protocols, to be honest, is the nature of the validators within our ecosystem. So, in our ecosystem, we call them executors, who are essentially the parties who validate transactions and generate yield for doing so. So they essentially act as liquidity providers and validators too. And, as per the protocol design, they ensure the transactions that they're executing. And so, that adds a level of security and guarantee for users, knowing that the person validating or the party validating their transactions is ensuring, their transactions. Basically, it's another sort of add-on onto this security model. Equally, when we sort of look around the ecosystem, there are a lot of projects doing a lot of good things within a similar realm. You can point to the likes of Moonbeam, although that's, in a lot of ways different in terms of it's essentially allowing for EVM to be deployed on Substrate. You look at sort of like composable finance, which is more DeFi focused. I think Darwinia, operates within a similar realm as well. I think, obviously what all of these guys are doing is fantastic, but where we set aside ourselves from them is also this ability to chain transactions together. So, when you think about a normal cross-chain protocol, the word bridge is quite apt because it essentially acts as a bridge in between two ecosystems, right? Us as a protocol, we sort of sit a level above that and essentially allow for execution across different environments. And now what that means is that you can essentially chain executions, into one single chain basically, and allow it to execute under one core, essentially, meaning that, if you want to withdraw liquidity somewhere, send it to someone else, do a token swap there, and then deposit it in the liquidity pool there, you can do that all within one single execution. It's, once again, sort of leaning towards this ethos that I sort of described in the beginning of the conversation, where we want, using blockchains to be seamless, easy, and secure, right? I think DeFi would be so much more valuable to everyone if it was that, if you didn't need to do these, cumbersome token swaps and jumping across ecosystem and bridging and, all of these things that sort of come with just trying to carry out what are relatively basic functionalities. And I think that's where we kind of set ourselves aside as a protocol, is that we can, facilitate this very easy but equally very secure execution across, all different ecosystems that we're integrated with, essentially.
Yeah, thank you, Sir Lad. We know that the competition is hard, but based on what you said, we know that how t3rn is always dead, maintain is very important, a very unique position in it. And in terms of, we can see that the multi-chain execution, about the transaction, and they're all very great. Yeah, I gotta say, yeah. So, what you just said about the multi-chain. So we know that when the multi-chain smart contract is executed, it creates transactions on other blockchains, and we kind of call it interoperability. I want to know that interoperability is also something that t3rn is always trying to do better about. So how does exactly t3rn handle the multi-chain transactions?
So, we have two ways of doing that. We essentially have escrow executions and optimistic executions, and they essentially work in different ways. So, as I touched on, the optimistic ones are insured ones. So, essentially, a call is made, and the party validating that transaction or making it possible essentially ensures that transaction with a 2x guarantee of a bonded stake, basically, that they have to put up to be able to, bid for that transaction. And essentially, Once a transaction is put forward, essentially a sort of bidding war begins between parties that will validate those transactions. So essentially an executor has to calculate whether it's worth for them. So, say they're holding, DOT and ETH, what it is worth for them to execute an execution from Polkadot to Ethereum. Like at what point do they decide it's not worth it for them to validate that transaction in terms of making a profit? And then, there's a sort of bidding window basically where different executors are allowed to sort of step forward and say, hey, I want to do this, or I want to validate this transaction. And once that window sort of closes, then, the best bidder essentially puts forward the transaction and validates it across the different chains. That's one model. Essentially, we have another, which is escrow execution, which requires a deployment of a smart contract or pallets, in the case of Polkadot, on the target chain. And sort of we're aware that this is going to be a bit of a slower adoption curve in that you don't want to deploy a smart contract or a pallet from a project that maybe you don't know so well, because it could be unaudited. It's there's obviously a lot of hacks in the space and so on. And so that's why we sort of put together these two different mechanisms of one, which is having a smart contract deployed for executions on your target chain, and then two, having validators or executors ensuring those transactions going forward as well. So yeah, two different forms of execution, obviously dependent on what chain we're executing on. We'll sort of leverage different technologies. So for example, in the case of Ethereum, we'll be using light clients. But yeah, that's sort of, I guess, getting a bit deeper into the weeds.
Wow, that's great work. I gotta say, that's something that's very helpful for listeners to get to know more about t3rn operation of the multi-chain transactions, and that's very informative and helpful. Thank you, sir. Yeah. So one of the biggest things that we very care about the project is about its partnership. So can you share with us about some of your recent partnerships that t3rn has entered into, and also what is the impact there for the t3rn's development and growth?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of partnerships, we've always had this, steadfast belief that we want partnerships that actually deliver value. I think, it's an open secret in the cryptocurrency space and blockchain space for projects like to partner for the marketing hype and little else in a lot of respects. And I think as we've approached every partnership that we've considered, we've wanted to see real world value and utility from that partnership, and that's very much our driving force when we consider who we want to work with going forward. Most recently, we've partnered with Subsquid to essentially allow on-chain data indexing within the t3rn ecosystem. So, we can offer sort of more comprehensive and accurate information to our users based on what Subsquid offers. Equally, we sort of worked with the Web3 Foundation to develop something called XBI, which is essentially a cross-chain standard overlay over XCM. And we've developed that in collaboration with Akala, Astar. Subsquid contributed to that as well. And so, that was a collaborative effort to develop. And, I think that was very valuable because essentially a standard is only as useful as how many people adopt it, right? And so collaborating with all of these great parties within the Polkadot ecosystem sort of helped refine it into a standard that actually brings value to everyone. I think now is the sort of more exciting part of our partnerships development in terms of as we roll out our MVP, having acquired a parachain about a month ago, we can start sort of pushing out our MVP, and then sort of further on from that, our light clients will be able to start, forming actually more meaningful partnerships in terms of actually utilizing our protocol rather than, developing standards like the XBI or actually, adding data indexing, which is something that we need for the front end to work, but it isn't actually the protocol in action. I think now, as a sort of next stage in our protocol maturity, that will actually be adoption of the protocol itself, and so that's something to look forward to in the coming months.
Wow, that's very worth expecting. Yeah, I gotta say that's very amazing. And yeah, we'll definitely wait for more good news from t3rn on this. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So well, we kind of want to hear about t3rn next steps. So do you have any plans for t3rn to grow more in the rest of 2023 or even further? Like, what are some cool developments or milestones we can expect to see from t3rn in the near future?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of what I touched on in the last answer, really. We acquired our parachain in March after quite a hectic bidding war. And so that essentially means we now have the core infrastructure to start rolling out the protocol itself. And so that's going to be the sort of next step you're going to see within the protocol. So essentially, we'll be demoing the protocol itself working in a substrate-based environment. And this is sort of going back to this notion of chaining transactions and reversibility that we enable. I think in some respects it's a fundamentally difficult concept to wrap your head around in terms of especially blockchain, because blockchains offer immutability as a core value, and so chaining transactions and allowing for sort of fail-safe, technically reversible execution is a concept that doesn't naturally align with the ethos of blockchains. And so that's something we want to start demoing in a substrate environment, just to show that it works and how it works, essentially. And then, in terms of next steps after that, we've got our Ethereum light client in the works, and it's progressing actually quite well. So that will be the sort of next step in terms of the protocol itself, which will essentially mean that we'll be bridging Polkadot and Ethereum. And from there on in, as hopefully we see adoption of the protocol, we'll be pushing out things like our smart contract repository, which is essentially a place where developers can upload their smart contracts. The t3rn protocol allows them to execute across different chains, and those developers can choose to get rewarded every time their smart contracts execute. So we sort of see it as a new paradigm for rewarding developers for the actual utility of the open source code that they contribute, which we're actually quite excited about. There's a lot more going on as well. So like XBI, the standard that I touched on, hopefully we'll start seeing more adoption of that. And then, onboarding network participants as well. As I said, arguably one of the most important actors within the whole t3rn ecosystem are these executors. And so we'll be onboarding those to our protocol to actually, allow it to function. So, I mean, if anyone within the community here or anyone listening, is familiar with running blockchain infrastructure, they're very welcome to check out our blog posts on what it is to be a t3rn executor and why it can be a profitable endeavor, especially for the early adopters in doing so. And yeah, we'll be onboarding those guys and sort of pushing onwards and upwards, hopefully. So yeah, as I mentioned, initially bridging Polkadot to Ethereum, and then we'll sort of be looking out further afield, following on from there.
Wow, I gotta say, a lot of great efforts, a lot of great achievements there. And we know that there's still a lot of hard work to really make all of them come into play. But we all believe that with t3rn, we can definitely have a lot of interesting news in the upcoming time. Yeah, and we definitely check them out. Yeah. So the next question, I think it's kind of interesting. Yeah, so as a layer 1 blockchain project, so to your point of view, what do you see about the next generation of dApps?
What do I see about the next generation of dApps? It's a good question, to be honest. I think it's one of the things that sort of fed into this smart contract repository idea that we initially started on, in terms of actually remunerating developers for the code that they contribute and actually, allowing them to get paid every time it executes. Because fundamentally, I think we still have a lot of space to grow in terms of meaningful use cases, within the space. I think DeFi is undeniably powerful, and I think, no one's now doubting that it's here to stay. Equally, I think NFTs fall into a similar bucket. They took some people by surprise when they emerged, but when you look at sort of as far as traditional mainstream, quote unquote Web2 adoption goes, NFTs have really showed their staying power. And I think, the utility of them is undeniable. But I think if you assume that those are going to be the only two use cases that sort of, push this industry to where we all believe it can go, I'd say you're probably mistaken. And the short answer to your question is I don't really know what the next generation of dApps will look like, but I'm proud to be building a protocol or an ecosystem where developers have incentives to push out ideas, experiment, see what works, see what doesn't, and then, essentially let the users be the judge. And, if they do build something valuable, they can make some considerable money out of it. But like I mentioned, every time the open source code that they contribute to our registry executes, they can opt to be paid per execution. And so, if you build something, let's just say for argument's sake, something like an ERC20 standard deployed within t3rn, you're going to be getting paid very often, considering it's a widely adopted thing, right? And so equally, if you do, deploy something in t3rn that gets that widely used, then you've got a sort of a whole economy there in itself. And so, that's kind of what we want to give to developers, this toolkit and these incentivization mechanisms to have the freedom and incentive to actually think about what the next generation of dApps looks like. Because, I can point to decentralized, social media, I can look at GameFi, I think that's a fantastic use case as well. But I couldn't hand on heart say that these are going to be the killer use cases for sure, in the same way. I might be the wrong person to ask, considering I wasn't the biggest fan of NFTs in the beginning. But, I think the important thing is to give developers the ability to build something that really sticks. And, that's what we sort of try to build within the t3rn protocol and ecosystem, like an incentivization mechanism to really experiment and push this whole space forward.
Yeah, that's definitely, yeah, right. And we know that it's not so easy to say what exactly gonna happen with the next generation of dApps, but as what you say, it's gonna be dynamic, it's gonna be like got a lot of changes, but we're very happy because as you say, it's a space, it's incentives for a lot of projects to keep growing, keep developing, keep serving, and that's what we want. That's what we really want from them, and what we really expect from the next generation of dApps. Yeah. So for the last question, we kind of want to get back on t3rn. Yeah. So if you have to say 3 words or 3 sentences to express your pride in t3rn, so what are those, sir?
Definitely the people. I think, I have the privilege of working with some of the most talented individuals across every department I've ever worked with. So, I think it's harder done than expected within blockchain, especially. It's essentially operating in an environment where people are throwing around loads of money, and it's quite wild, and people sort of see it as a bit of a crazy industry. So I think having created this team of nearly 20 people who are all, so focused, so driven, and so talented, I think that is, one of the biggest pleasures and privileges I have of working on t3rn. So definitely one of those words would certainly be the people. I think innovation as well, like I mentioned, actually creating something that can be the underlying technology and really has the potential to do so, and actually push blockchain forward as a whole, whether that's through facilitating multi-chain execution or, creating an economy for developers to actually get rewarded fairly for the code that they contribute. I think, that's something that I'm definitely proud of as well. And other than that, Polkadot. I think Polkadot's a really, really fantastic ecosystem to work in. A very, supportive, very positive, very secure as well, as we sort of touched on in the beginning of the conversation. So yeah, I think those three things are arguably, those three words sort of stand out to me off the top of my head about working on t3rn. So it's, people, innovation, and Polkadot.
Yeah, that's definitely what we see, obviously, in t3rn, like what t3rns have to let you go this far. And also, we really appreciate what t3rn's doing for the community, for the network. And yeah, we definitely wait for more, in the upcoming time. So I think it's all about the questions today. We've been through a lot about t3rn and what is unique about t3rn, and also what are some interesting upcoming events that we really need to, raise an alarm on, need to expect on. Yeah, that's very amazing. So before we say goodbye, sir, do you have any words left for our listeners today?
No, I mean, it's genuinely been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Some really fantastic questions that I've enjoyed diving in on. I think for anyone interested in what we're doing, please follow us on Twitter at our handle is t3rn, t3rn_io. We've got a lot of exciting things coming in the next few months that I wouldn't want for anyone to miss out on. Otherwise, we're always on Telegram and Discord as well, so feel free to check us out there. And my DMs are always open as well if anyone wants to reach out. But yeah, it's just been a genuine pleasure speaking with you about what we're building at t3rn, and love what you guys are doing at Polkadot Insider. Really, really great for the whole ecosystem. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, sir, a lot, and also t3rn for giving us a chance to be your bridge to the community today. And also, we are very thankful for all listeners joining us today. We hope that you just had a very relaxing time, very helpful, lovely time with us. Yeah, and yeah, do not forget to follow t3rn for the very, the upcoming events that you should not miss. Yeah, so we're gonna have a recap video posted on our Twitter very soon. So wait for it, so you're not gonna miss any important information about this AMA. Yeah, so I think it's time for us to say goodbye. So goodbye, everyone, and have a nice day.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye.